much more, which is the acronym. So I will only talk about Upgrade Plus. It's a project that is funded by the German Ministry for Agriculture and Nutrition and is administered by the Federal Institute for Agriculture and Nutrition, which is very important in terms of administration, because it is a bit of a nightmare, because our African partners have to comply with all the very, very strict rules of this institution. And that means they have a lot of work to do that could be made easier and could be streamlined somehow if the funding body wasn't as rigid. And this is actually the only problem we have within this project, because also the way the funding is set up, we don't get overheads, which doesn't make the partner institutions happy in Africa. So we are working with institutions in Ghana, Nigeria and Sierra Leone, and all our project partners have the problem that their administration says, not our problem, because we don't get money from you. So it is all on the project leads, who are very, very good researchers, but have never been in the position of having to do massive administration jobs, and particularly not according to German really, really strict rules. So that as a background to the actual problems we have in the project. Everything else I present is more challenges rather than problems. But as a background to the project, obviously there has been a call for funding from the Federal Ministry of Agriculture for cooperation with partners in Sub-Saharan Africa and Southeast Asia. Very quickly we decided we want to go for West Africa, which also had the background that we did a project in East Africa for 5 years, so some of you will be aware of the Reload project, some of you will actually have worked in the Reload project, which was focused very much on East Africa. And we decided, okay, it's time now for us to take some of what we've learned there and learn about the situation in West Africa and work based on that. As a background to the situation in general, because it was a nutrition call, about 2 billion people in the world are actually undernourished in terms of micronutrients. So up until 10-15 years ago, the main goal of development projects was feed people so they are not hungry. So what happened was there was a big focus on starchy products that will give you enough calories. But there was very little focus on the fact that the human body also needs micronutrients to survive and to strive. And women of reproductive age and children up to about 5 years are particularly vulnerable when it comes to that, with the women often even before they have their first child, because they usually will not have access to sufficient foodstuffs, and when they become pregnant for the first time, the problem obviously becomes bigger, because they need nutrition also for the growing baby. And from the baby's perspective, even when they are still in the womb, they already are micronutrient deficient, if not even having not enough energy. And then they are born, and for a multitude of reasons, they will not get sufficient access to micronutrients when they are born and when they are growing up, and then that can have severe consequences for their development. I'll give you a few numbers later on. And a very recent study actually found that about 1/3 of all child deaths in Africa are down to micronutrient deficiency. I mean, that is really a lot. At the same time, we have a situation where the FAO has published numbers in 2013, so this 1.3 billion comes from there, that about 1/3 of all food that it would produce and would actually be suited for consumption is spoiling across the world. And actually, it's roughly the same levels in developing countries and in industrialized countries. It just has different causes. In developing countries, it's often that there are no means to process and store a long time. So for lack of, for example, fuel, energy to do the processing, for the fact that at the end of the rainy season, most crops that also deteriorate very quickly are there in huge mass, and you cannot process as much as is there at that moment, and then a few weeks later there's nothing left, basically. But also that brings me to a subject. If any one of you is aware of the discussions in agricultural engineering and agriculture overall, there are usually the arguments, we need to grow more food, we need to do genetic modification, we need to increase the yield per hectare, and so on and so on, otherwise we cannot feed a growing population. But these arguments always ignore the fact that currently 1/3 of all food that is produced is lost. So this is where we are coming in, partially, because we say, look, it is already there, we need to find means to increase the percentage of the food that actually is being used, which means we need to find solutions to increase the availability of processing systems that are affordable to communities, or even on a bigger level, maybe on a market where you process your food on a pay-per-use system. Because it cannot be that we decide we just have to grow more and more and more and more, and completely disregard the fact that there is a lot that is lost at the moment, and also I have no illusions, if we grow more, it will be large scale, because that is the other thing that is propagated. And the people we are targeting in this project will not have any access to that foodstuff that is produced there. There is a problem with traditional processing methods. They might not be suited for what you want to do. Might not be suited also means there are obviously drying systems. There are open sun drying and so on and so forth. And usually that might make the product last longer. But often, particularly when you dry something in open sun, that means it is for 1 week or for 2 weeks, which means you start drying, then the night comes and the insect come, the rodents come, the relative moisture content of the air is increasing, so water is going back into the product, and you repeat that until it's dry, meaning that many of the micronutrients are gone. You often have a problem with microorganisms. So every one of you has heard of aflatoxins in stores. That is a big problem across the world, actually, and is a direct consequence of insufficient technological means for the drying processes. What we also have found is in a market survey in Ghana that fruits and vegetables growing and selling and everything is a woman's job. So we were meeting with a total of 150 vendors for vegetables and vegetable products on the market in Tamale in northern Ghana, and there was not a single man. So it is definitely a woman's job to deal with fruits and vegetables, but fruits and vegetables also are the agricultural products with the highest amounts of micronutrients, which is very important. But they are also kind of neglected. They are usually grown mainly on a subsistence basis, and if you have something left, you go to the market and sell them. They are often not grown larger scale. So I have already mentioned that we have partners in Ghana, Nigeria, and Sierra Leone. But basically, the setup of the whole project is very interdisciplinary. So every one of you will have heard of DITSEL. So we have sociologists from DITSEL working with us on mainly the engagement with the women's groups, with deciding which women's groups are suitable to actually test the systems that the technologists in the project are developing. We have a company involved, Innotech Ingenieursgesellschaft, which is situated near Stuttgart, that has more than 25 years of experience in developing and producing and giving advice on running systems, mainly in Sub-Saharan Africa, but also in Southeast Asia and South America. And in Ghana, we were working together with the University for Development Studies. Our partner there is also an agricultural engineer. He's actually a graduate of our department and went back to Ghana 3 years ago, which in Ghana is kind of still a bit hit and miss sometimes, but in relation to other countries, very comfortable situation. But in Sierra Leone, where we are working with Nchala University, the access to electricity is 9% of the population. Mm. So completely different. You have 86, don't you? 82.5. 82.5. Yeah, she's the expert here. So what we are doing is we are developing small-scale processing units that are also modular in their nature. So if you think of producing flour, for example, which is part of what we are doing, you are starting with having your raw material that needs to be washed or cleaned at least. Then you either peel it or you don't, but you need to cut it. You might have other pre-treatments that you want to do. Then in our case, you will dry the product. Once it is dry enough, you can either store it safely for a very long time if the packaging is all right, and if the storage is all right. And what we are also doing is we want to mill whatever comes out, make it into a powder, and use it as an additive for foodstuffs. The very practical background of this is we do not want to produce new products that actually need to be advertised, where you have to convince people that they should buy it because it's so fantastic. We are not a company Nestle when they brought in baby milk powder. So we were very clear from the beginning, we need something that can be acceptable to people. So we are working on the basis of trying to produce things that can be mixed into traditional food. So be that gruel for baby nutrition, be that baked goods. And with baked goods we have the additional advantage, the higher the concentration or percentage of whatever we produce within the baked good, the lower the import of wheat from outside of the country. But yeah, this is one of the core points for us. We are not in a position to produce new food and to convince people to buy that food. Also, we obviously need to promote the importance of micronutrition, nutrients for the diet, and what that actually means in terms of diversification of the local diet or of the family's diet. Because in quite a few cases we have found basically everything would be there if you include so-called underutilized species. So in many cases it's not the problem of the access to a diverse diet. There are other issues. One that we have seen in East Africa actually is leaves of cassava are highly nutritious when it comes to micronutrients, but it's animal food. By definition, it's animal food. You can make beautiful vegetables with it, but in everyone's head, it's animal food. And I mean, that's fair enough. We cannot say, but we know better. So there are lots of issues around that, what is perceived as what, or cassava, even cassava flour overall, is considered as poor man's food. It changes a bit now. In Ghana, for example, there are breweries that make beer from cassava. So the perception shifts a bit, but classically cassava was only for people who cannot afford anything else. And therefore, if you could afford, you wouldn't buy it. Or we had a similar situation in Germany after the war. If you could afford it, and you would eat meat, and you would eat a lot of meat, because that was something that you could only have if you could afford it. And it was something that was very scarce during the war. So if you look at the diets in the 50s and 60s, it was massively meat heavy. And nowadays it's completely different. And what for us, with the background of this severe problem of women and little children having not enough micronutrients in their diet and the high death rate amongst children, we are specifically focusing on women, on women's groups in the 3 countries. And what we try to do is work together with them, even in the development of our processing lines. So see what their needs are and try to cater to those needs. So we'll have 3 pilot plants, and they might all look very different. I mean, in general, yes, you need something to cut, and that will be similar in all cases, but you will have different products, so it might need to look a bit different. Same for the dryer, depending on what they want to actually process, they might look a bit different. And with the milling, obviously there are lots of staple foods that also need to be milled, so no matter with what group we have talked, they say we need a mill that has the capacity to not just process whatever we are doing here with the underutilized species, we also need to be able to actually work on other products as well, because that would actually economically help us. So what have we done so far? We have actually met with a lot of different groups in the 3 countries. We have reached more than 1,450 individuals, so women. We have looked into the current status of nutrition for them and for their children, but also what the barriers are. And I'll just give you some numbers from Nigeria. So in Nigeria, about 50% of all children reach the minimum meal frequency. However, which already is fairly low. So over half of the children do not get food as frequently as they should. Only 18.2% actually reach the minimum accepted dietary threshold, which means over 80% do not get enough food. And only 23.3% of the children reach the minimum required dietary diversity to actually lead a healthy life. And the direct consequences, as we found, are in the areas in Nigeria that we have looked into, 40% of the children are stunted, 18.5% of the children are wasted, and 23.6% are underweight. So these are numbers that are absolutely shocking to me. What we have found, what the barriers often are for a more diverse and obviously a more nutritious diet are economic constraints, but also a lack of knowledge in many cases, so how much you need to eat, how diverse you need to eat. Then the seasonality is a problem. I mean, you have in some parts the rainy season. Within the rainy season, you have enough food towards the end of the rainy season. There is a huge surplus, and then the further into the dry season you get, the lower is the accessibility of a diverse diet. And what we have worked on as well is looking into underutilized species in all 3 countries, and then decided what we actually want to work with. We had a total of 60 different species. We identified initially, we narrowed it down to 26 species now across the 3 countries, and have done nutritional assessments. So micronutrient contents were looked at, but also anti-nutritive components, because in some of the plants you might actually have poisonous components that are counteracting the positives. We have looked into the markets, working on developing market strategies, and throughout the project we have been using a participatory approach to make sure that the women's groups are on board, to make sure that also the extended society gets on board. Because what we have learned definitely is obviously the men need to buy in, but the interesting thing for us was, it's not just the men needing to buy in, it is actually the sons who have to be, let's say, caught for the course. Because with the fathers it's often difficult, but if the sons are on board and on the side of the mother, then things can happen. Basically, I told you already, we wanted to find new uses for foods that have been there all along. And we have been looking in things like orange flesh sweet potatoes, because they are very high in vitamin A, for example. And there are lots of promotions at the moment in Sub-Saharan Africa for orange flesh sweet potatoes, but the problem is that it's very difficult still to actually store them. So if you store them fresh, you can only do that for 4 to 6 weeks. If you produce pulp to mix into some food products, they have to be cooled and so on and so forth. So producing powders and flours would actually be a possibility to work on. But what we are doing with these 26 species, or how these 26 species came about, was we had a very clear, basically marking scheme. So the selection was based on the nutritional characteristics, the market potential, which is very important. It doesn't help if we have something that is a wild berry that you can only find in the forest, and there is no chance to cultivate it in any bigger quantities. So these things are left out. It's just things where we can actually say, okay, if this is a way forward, we can actually increase the production. Okay. And obviously the processing characteristics were very important. And sometimes women's groups will be producing intermediate products, sometimes they will produce final products. And as I said, we want to strengthen the situation of the women in their communities. What you need to know is that it is expected of women to actually contribute significantly to the household income. They often organize themselves in groups. There are, for example, village savings and loan groups, there are mother support groups, and the susus. The thing with the village savings and loans can give out money. They also are a social support network, if you want, because they sometimes pay for school fees for the children, they pay for funerals, and so on. The problem with that is they will only give loans out to women who can pay back, and they will only let women in who have the financial capital to support the cause, which is understandable, but that means the very weak parts of society will still be excluded. And what we found in Sierra Leone with the mother support groups is they actually are only existing mainly to get money from NGOs. So initially we wanted to work with these groups. They were initially started with the vaccination programs of the UN, and then Helen Keller International was working with them on vitamin A deficiency, mainly in children, so basically blindness and impact on eyesight. But the reality now is that they are mainly there to take the money from NGOs, because many NGOs, as we found, now just want to tick their boxes, and it's very easy to tick the box when you go somewhere and say, here, we expect this from you, sign here, and they go. It's a sad reality in Sierra Leone. Also, what is very important, there are huge dynamics problems. So if a woman is powerful in her community, she usually is powerful in several contexts. So she will be leading several groups, and there will be a conflict of interest by the nature of it. What Ditzel has done is working on the joint development of the plans for processing food and for marketing the food with the women's group. There is a very high interest, and you can't really see it here. There was a meeting in Tamale in Ghana where a company came in. So, they are called Bee Diet. They use They actually work with orange fresh sweet potato as a sweetener in some of their products and are very interested in increasing the market, but have a huge problem with getting access to OFSP in the dry season. But they were actually willing to come and explain to the women what their products are like, what is possible in terms of processing products, and why it is important to package them correctly. And the nice thing about that was, it was the head of the company coming, and he did not ask for money, which is a really good sign overall. And there were a total of 5 women's groups attending, so there is also a big interest in this topic. I just end with this because I have ranted on too much. What we have also found is that there is a big problem in the social dynamics. So I'm showing you this because of this picture. This is a woman in Nigeria from a women's group. This is a part of an oil press for palm oil. So this women's group has decided to work on palm oil. They are growing the plants, they are processing everything, and they make a decent income for the group and therefore for the families that are associated to the group. Then this mill has broken down. And I don't know if there are any engineers in here, and if there are, if you can see this. It is a very crude part. A crude part that could be repaired or replaced by a somewhat talented technician or a craftsman. They went to a local craftsman and asked him for a quote for the repair, and his answer was the equivalent of $800. Because the mill has broken and they want to further process their products, they now have to go to a neighbor who has a smaller mill, so more work for them, and they have to pay a fee for the usage. And obviously it's not officially confirmed, but I am almost 100% sure that that neighbor is giving some of the money he gets to that craftsman. Because, I mean, it wouldn't cost $800 in Germany to repair this. And I'll end here and we can discuss the rest.